So we're going to start off with something which you can talk amongst yourselves for a minute, probably, but it's just something that I love. I may cut it off halfway, but anyway, I'm going to share the screen and you can make your own mind up. So here we go, sharing the screen. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully this will now work. I'll just leave it running for a minute. That's the topic for the night. First of all, checking that you can hear me. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Peter.
Right, okay. I'll just let this run for a minute because I think it says a lot about the sound. I presume you can hear sound as well from the video.
Yes.
Good. Been trying to make it at the right level, but I'm not sure I've achieved. This will take a while, but this is a real film of the moonrise taken with a very, very long lens. People coming up to see the full moon, and it's just 2 years old now, but it makes me shiver. It's all about moon now. Does that count? To be able to turn it down. I'm going to move on and not bore you with that. It's a good start. Moon above that right. So, I'm going to bore you with a bit of history, really. That's a shock from a nice moonrise, isn't it? But that's sort of the current antenna system, but we'll come back to that later. So, I'm not going to read. I'm not going to read many of these out, but they're kind of self-explanatory, and I'll talk over them. If you have a question, just shout up, or I was going to say something in the chat, but I might miss it. If somebody says something in the chat and I haven't seen it, somebody give me a prod, please. So, okay, you know, there's lots of special interest groups. That's what's great about the hobby. Lots of people doing lots of things. They've also got each one its fair share of naysayers, prophets, missionaries, zealots, people that, oh, I don't know why you do that, or that's not radio, or what have you. So, as far as I'm concerned, you can say what you like. I don't care. I'm not going to criticize anybody else's what they do that I'm not interested in. I just get on with what I like, and that's what's great about the hobby. So, in the beginning, interesting. Meccano, we all did that. Well, I did. I'm 72. All played with Meccano. But I got an old radio from a junk sale. And after a few electric shocks and twiddling things, I discovered shortwave radio and trawler band. I also came across, and anybody who's read my little biog thing in the club magazine or on the website will know about this. But I happened to hear somebody top band mobile, and they were flipping loud, and I discovered that they were going down the road in front of my house at the time. Didn't know anything about who they were, what they were, but as a 10-year-old, I wasn't worried and scared about anything, you know, I was invincible. And so I tracked out where this bloke lived and went and knocked on his door. And that was the beginning of all this mess. I discovered Gordon Banks, G3SNX, who's silent key now, I'm afraid, but back then he was mad keen on top band and top band mobile, and pretty soon, before I knew where I was, I'd found, or been taken to, Stockport Radio Society. An interesting little sideline here when you think about it. Stockport Radio Club met at the Blossoms, met in the bar, then went to a room upstairs. But it was a private meeting. I was a 10-year-old. And nobody seemed to bother, you know, it was just, and my parents didn't bother. I'd get, either Gordon would take me or somebody else would take me, or I'd get on the bus and come into Stockport from Reddish, and that'd be it, and go home at 11 o'clock at night. Anyway, moving on. It was a good time to start, though I didn't know. I had no idea that it was actually the peak of the solar cycle. I didn't even know what a solar cycle was, of course. But what I did know was that you could get walkie-talkies down in Shude Hill in Manchester, and you could sometimes hear and talk to American CBers on AM. Great fun. We moved on. I've moved on through a few solar cycles. When I first started in the 60s, very early 60s, we were at a massive solar cycle peak. That's why I was hearing such good stuff. Moving on, G8BCG did quite well in solar cycle 20, as you will see. Moving up from an all wireless, some of you might even recognise that thing. It's a PCR3, which is a Pi Communications Receiver 3. There were millions of them, and there were about £7 or £8 each to buy, fully working. It was good, and you could hear people because most people were still using AM in those days. Anyway, there's a steady move towards SSB, and we'll come to this more in a bit. Back then in the early 60s, there were a lot of people around who said, SSB? Oh, that's not proper radio. It can't be. It doesn't even have a carrier. And they were serious. They didn't like SSB. They wanted to stay on AM. But there we go. Time moves on. Of course, you needed not an ordinary broadcast receiver. You needed a BFO or a product detector or something to receive SSB. So your old broadcast radio bought from a junk sale didn't work anymore. But there was a ready supply of stuff at pocket money prices. I mean, it really was. Back then it seemed a long time after World War II to a 10, 12, 14, 15-year-old. But looking from here, it was only just after the war, Consequently, there was a lot of good kit around. Some of you might know these things. Admiralty wireless receivers, the B40 and the B41. They were massive, and they were built like a battleship, and the pair of them was about the same weight as the average battleship as well, I think. But they were a great set of receivers. But really, I started off with a 19 set. Of course, it was a transmitter as well as a receiver. Ooh, that's tempting, isn't it? And it also had a battlefield VHF set in it. In other words, a short-range VHF transceiver built in the later models. So it was a 19 set that kept me warm at night. No rude comments yet, but it lived under my bed and it was always on, and it's amazing I didn't burn the house down. So amateur band shortwave listening, yeah, it was great fun, mainly AM. Some of you might recognise these call signs. These were in the very early days. I'm trying to read the date on that, but I can't. It's in there somewhere, but there we go, G3PY. He was local. So FMQ was a local as well, and G3BA in Birmingham up the top. Jeff Barnes, G3AOS. Then you start getting, this is shortwave listening, and hearing stuff, good stuff, New Zealand. I also had a 70 meg army radio, and I was very lucky to hear Don, G3AOO, on his way home one night. And I think it was 1967, and he worked Gibraltar on 70 megs. Back then, that had never been done before, and his was one of the first contacts. It was sporadic E. A lot of people kept saying, no, it's a pirate, can't be true, you can't work that far on 70 megs. But there we go, we did. There's a QSL card here that I want you to remember, which is G2BSA in Hannaford, Lou, which is quite close to where I am now. And I sent him an SWL report for 80 meters back in 1966. We will come back to that a lot later. Meanwhile, this is an interesting one, of course. In the Cold War, I used to listen as a kid to Voice of America, Radio Moscow, Radio Prague, and they sent QSL cards. Radio Peking, and the little bit in italics there. I had an American cousin who was on a submarine based at Holy Lock, and he came to see us. And he was not impressed by my QSL cards and load of stuff from Radio Prague and particularly Radio Moscow. That did not impress him at all, as you can imagine. Sure, there are some of these still around. AR-88s and AR-88D and LF, another pair, one for MF and HF up to 30 megs and the other one for LF and VLF. They were wonderful. I can still smell them in my nostrils because they used to have leaky transformers and leaky capacitors, and they had a certain oily smell. They were a bit like a motorbike most of the time. So this is an interesting one. Note the black screen.
Now, we have this late word, this bulletin, President Kennedy is dead. The President of the United States was shot down by an assassin's bullet as he rode through downtown Dallas, Texas, in an open automobile today.
Well, I actually heard that live, and my mum and dad wouldn't believe me, and it was several hours before it came on the radio, on the wireless rather. It was just so unbelievable, and of course before the internet and before all of that stuff, nobody knew for a long time here. Anyway, moving on, a surplus of surplus. Does anybody remember NW Electrics on Great Ancoats Street?
Certainly do.
Yeah, Fred G3MAX and 3SMI and J8SB, that's one of their adverts out of the shortwave mag. They were great. They sold brand new stuff for rich people, Edison, KW, TW Communications, but they also sell loads of surplus stuff, sold loads of surplus stuff, and they were great. You name it, they had it. They were also very friendly, even to, well, they also supplied good tea and biscuits for the regulars, and I used to be there every Saturday trying to spend my pocket money. I must have been a real one of them. But there we go, they put up with me. Not only that, there was quite a lot of stuff in other shops around the area. New Cross Radio, Globe Radio, loads of others. So it was good fun. So initially my interest in VHF didn't come from Stockport Radio Society. It came out of hanging out at NW Electrics because Fred was a very keen VHF bloke and contester. He also had a warehouse in an old mill the other side of Great Ancoats Street, spread over about 4 floors of a whacking great mill and full of the entire contents of World War II, I think. On the top of that building, they also had a radio shack, the Northwest VHF Group, as it was called. And it was there that I first discovered amateur radio satellites, Oscar 2 and Oscar 3. Exciting stuff. I didn't quite know what it was at the time, but I did know they had a big 2-meter aerial system on the roof, and it could move not just round and round, but up and down as well. So that was the beginning of some interest. Frequent trips up to Axe Edge, playing radio, contests and whatnot, field day, and I was hooked basically. So, bit of a dilemma there, you see. I'm at Stockport Radio Society. I've also got this secret 19 set under the bed, and there's all kinds of things going on. So, pirate or proper? Well, 19 set, and even the homebrew 807 rig were known to be operated from my place using various dubious made-up call signs or no call signs at all. But soon I was dragged back onto the straight and narrow, and of course, like a lot of people, went to Ray's G3FYE's class. And amazingly, thanks to Ray, I passed the RAE. And that was really, back then, when I think about it, it was a nightmare because it was a proper City and Guilds test, a proper written exam with lots of topics and not really many specimen papers. And it was, well, I was lucky. So G8BCG happened in August 67, 1 month after my 16th birthday. Why a month? Well, first of all, you couldn't have a call sign until you were 16. But secondly, again, no email, no internet, just right into the Home Office in London and saying, please, I filled in the form, can I have a license? A month later, and came back. So this is when more activity with SRS, contests, field days, Jamboree on the air, Bramall and all over the place. The NRSA committee, as it was then called, the Northern Radio Societies Association, and of course the annual convention at Bellevue. So I was well and truly hooked. And bearing in mind, I only started work in August 1967 with the GPO as it was then. So all of that lot had occurred before then. My mum and dad's house, with what you're looking at there, is a homemade wooden tower with what the bottom one is actually. Middle one's 2 meters, top one's 77s, and I think you just can't see the elements on the bottom one, which is probably a 4 meter. Oh, it might be a multi-beam. It might be a parabeam or so. Anyway, that was about 1967 with a wooden tower. However, that was 77s back then, because Class B licenses, which is what the G8s were, only had access to 77s and above. So you start high and go low. I was on 77s from the day my license arrived. A homebrew 8 meg crystal controlled AM rig, 8 megs multiplied by however many times it is to get you up to 144, and then multiplied by another 3 to get you up to 432, and a valve receive converter into the good old ARH8. But just a year after I got licensed, and this surprised me when I look back on this because it seemed like an age, but just a year after I got licensed, I heard on the news bulletin that G8s could now use 2 meters as well as 77s and above. And during the course of the rest of the news bulletin on a Sunday morning, I ripped my rig apart, connected an aerial to the 2 meter bit of it, and managed to work Birmingham, Tom Douglas in Birmingham, at the end of GB2RS, and I was on 2 meters. Soon, I was obviously being paid too much at the GPO, because soon I had a P60 Versatower at my parents' home. They were they weren't too impressed, but they let me do it. And I was running SSB from a homebrew Exciter on 2 and 70. Lots of portable added to the experience, and this is, what was different back then. You had to get out and do it. This is actually Meriton Low in the late 60s or possibly early 70s. On the left, pulling a guy rope by the looks of it, is Alan G8BRF, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. He was my best man at the wedding as well. The guy on the right is Steve J8AJB, who was from Oldham but used to come to Stockport Club quite a lot. Yeah, that's G8BRF, I think, or it might be G8CZW, I'm not entirely sure. But there we are assembling a massive set of 23 SEMS antennas for VHF Field Day, I think. We used to do a lot of portable work and travelling round as well. I went up to Scotland with Alan G8BRF. That's Lowther Hill in Dumfriesshire, I think it is, with our little 8 element beam in front of all the commercial stuff. So, started on 70 SEMS, came down to 2 meters, then came satellites. Again, having heard them in Manchester when I was first a shortwave listener. 1970s was a really exciting time for satellites. It really brought amateur satellite communications for everyone. Lots of fun. Oscar 6, launched in 1972, was 2 meters up and 10 meters down, SSB and CW, which raised a bit of a question because G8s were only allowed on VHF. And so the question was asked, can G8s use this satellite? And the answer, thankfully, from the Home Office came back, yes, because you are only transmitting on 2 meters. The fact that the satellite's re-radiating you on 10 meters is the satellite, not you. So carry on, go for it. Whoopee, we did. That is G8. I'm just moving a bit of my screen away. G8BHQ, John, who is now G4IAL up in Preston, was one of my first QSOs. He was in Hazel Grove at the time, so Denton to Hazel Grove via space was a bit of a laugh. Hello, nothing happened when I pressed the button. That's because I'm not on the screen. Right, let's try again. But other stuff was workable as well. That was on, is that Oscar 6? Oh, yeah, Oscar 6, VE. And then Oscar 7 followed. And that had 2 repeaters on it, or 2 transponders. Mode A, which was the same as the other one, 2 meters up and 10 meters down. But following that, Mode B, which was much more fun. 70 SEMS up and 2 meters down. a bit like the current ones. You can transmit on 77s on SSB, and you come back down on 2 meters and work the world. So, you know, you begin to see all kinds of stuff. And it was just amazing for, you know, at that point, I'd not been licensed that long. Well, 10 years then by AO8 launch in 1978, but having lots of fun on various satellites. Of course, not to be outdone, Russia also launched 2 radio Sputniks. Both were 2 meters up and 10 meters down, and they were great fun. They were a lot more sensitive than the Oscar ones, and you could really work through them with next to no power. They were fantastic. So, another few QSLs, and we will be moving on. Moon bounce. Oh, marriage. Yeah. Anyway, there's a QSL card there, and it's not from my wedding. P60 had to go. I got married and we moved to Droylsden, but still playing radio, just not with the P60. About the same time, the Stanford University borrowed the radio astronomy dish and did some moon bounce tests on 144 and 432, and that's really interesting. It was obviously big boy stuff, you know, that dish is a bit like Jodrell Bank, but it still was interesting. It was even more interesting when I actually heard them on CW on 2 meters beaming at the horizon when the moon was setting. So that really, you know, ooh, maybe I could do this, but you need a big aerial. So, still being quite young, yes, I did do that. I wrote to Sir Bernard Lovell. Not only that, I got a reply. He said no. Not surprising, not surprising. So moon bounce would have to wait, basically, because back then you did need big aerials and all sorts. But, you know, there we go. By 1977, 2 kids, no money, lots of things going on. But we moved to a hilltop in Stalybridge, so it had a nice takeoff anyway. Now, this is where it all starts to get sort of interesting. Moving into all kinds of political issues in the UK and no pay and inflation and what have you. So I managed to get a job, whoops, there we go, in the Solomon Islands. And, well, it changed our lives really. 7 years out there made a lasting impression on us all. It was brilliant. I went for 2 years, stayed for 7. Guadalcanal, you'll all have heard of that. Battle for Guadalcanal. John Wayne was there, but not in real life. But John F. Kennedy was there in real life as the commander of a PT boat, which got sunk off that island that you're looking at, out to sea there. And he was rescued by Solomon Islands locals. So there we go. Anyway, moving on. It was just amazing. Obviously, it was a nice place to live, but for radio, it was fantastic. Fortunately, I had a job within telecoms, and not surprisingly, there were other radio hams there, mainly expats, but it was good. Of course, people come and go in these foreign postings, so I had no interest in HF radio at the time. However, I did spend a lot of time on 28 megs with regular long skeds back to the UK, particularly with SRS members, and also with Stan Aspinall, G3VSA in Wythenshawe, South Manchester Radio Club. This caused a lot of frustration for those wanting to work H44 when I was just chatting to the UK. And as you can see, quite coincidentally, I'm pointing at the screen, I don't know why I'm doing that, but you can see H44PT there just happened to be in the Solomon Islands from 1979 through 85, all through cycle 21. The good news, people come and go. So I bought a complete station at a knockdown price from a New Zealand ham who was leaving actually and wanted to sell it. Ah, yes, there's the young Peter. That picture's taken a little bit later on when I fully equipped the shack, but the top shelf there all came from the UK. microwave modules, transverter, bits and pieces, SWR bridge. Some people might even recognise on the right-hand side of that shelf, below the cassette player, the G8CZW digital frequency counter, which was a club project that I think we built about 30 or 40 of them back in the mid-1970s. Middle shelf is an old FT220 that I took out with me, and then an early ICOM 701. So this must be 81, 82. And the bottom shelf there is the Kenwood TS520 that I bought, including an antenna tuner, but also this thing which is a TV506, which was a 6-meter transverter. It's my first QSL card, hand drawn and printed by a local printer. The thing on the left is not a canoe, it's a thing called a news drum for banging out the messages. Bit later QSL card. That's a bit, it wasn't really that bright. Another picture of the shack. Now, 6 meters was truly magic. I built a beacon. This is my first journey into making beacons. Can you hear the sound from that? Somebody just stick their hand up or shout for yeah,
okay.
Right, good. That's H24HIL beacon, which I built in our training workshop and was running, well, all the time I was there, and actually stayed running after I left. But to give you an idea what 6 meters can sound like in the tropics, and does sound like here from time to time, but not quite so often. This is an early QSO I had. I've lost my mouse, hang on. An early QSO I had with Kenya, which is a bloody long way from the Pacific. Oh, that didn't work too well. Let's try again.
144 Pacific Tokyo, this is 504 Charlie Sierra. Very good afternoon, Peter. Thank you very much for coming back to my beacon. You are 5 and 9, 5 and 9 flat, a very strong beacon, 20 over F9, 20
We'll stop that and just do another quick one. I've got loads of them, so I won't play them all. Peru.
This is Ocean America 4, America, Washington, Denmark, Lima, Peru. Well, you're having 9+20, the last transmission again, so you're just blasting. I have to go and close the door of the shack here so that it doesn't wake up the whole family. You're just blasting through. It's just a tremendous signal, Peter. And maybe...
This is late at night. And finally, again, Venezuela.
Roger, Gearbox 1167, Gearbox 1167 characters, very fine. Thank you very much, best quality, so you look out for the Japan 60. And I'm going to look at 52020.
Right, so these guys, some of them are still around actually as well, so amazing. That's my house out in the Solomons. You'd only get black and white film developed locally, with a 6-meter beam on the bottom and a 2-meter beam and a 70-centimeter beam. You can't see the bits of wire I used for HF, but the 2-meter beam and the 70-centimeter beam came in handy because after 50 megs, oh, and some QSL cards. Ascension Island was another one, of course. Fiji, that's local. Liberia. Oh, moving on. Of course, Oscar 10 was launched, as we'll come to in a minute, was launched just after I was out there. And Oscar 10 was in a very fancy orbit. It was in an elliptical orbit, which meant it had amazing range at times. It covered pretty much half the Earth's surface. So my old FT220 and the microwave modules transverter and the aerial ship from the UK one of which got driven over when it was on the floor in my drive, but we managed to tape it back together. So Oscar 10 was brilliant, and I was definitely in demand as DX, and I managed to work for U1ITU in Switzerland as well via the satellite, which was amazing. I'm just looking for the date, 1983, there we go. But again, it was great for regular skeds back to the UK, which was brilliant, and we've never had a satellite like it since. Shame, but true. Of course, I built a big PA, and then I worked a few stations, and it was all good fun. Found time for doing other things as well as the kids were growing up and living on a Pacific island. There had to be 36 hours in every day, really, I suppose. This is me on satellite. There's somebody here in Japan, I think. This is yeah, K6MYC I knew relatively well. I'd worked him on 6 meters a lot, and some of you may recognise the call sign. He's actually a guy called Mike Stahl, and he's one of the M's in M squared. Him and his wife Myrna, Mike and Myrna, created M squared antennas in California. Excuse me, and that was that QSO that we had was on one of the first orbits of Oscar 10, and we were both new to it, so it was quite good and very exciting. I won't bother with the other two.
And my name is Aaron, America Radio, October, November.
That was a guy in Israel for my first Israeli contact. That's a ZL. We'll move on. Right. So, moving rapidly on, 1983 was World Communications Year, which I didn't know much about at the time, but it was really quite good. And we'd formed a very new radio society, Solomon Islands Radio Society, and World Communications Year seemed like a really good thing to be able to promote ham radio, as well as my professional side of things in broadcast radio and telecoms and phones and what have you. So we did loads of public demonstrations, and we got quite a lot of interest locally and regionally. So there we go. We also managed to get a stamp published, printed, issued. That's the right word, issued. In fact, it was part of a set for World Communications Year, but we got a special first day cover, as you can see, and they turned out to be quite popular. We sold tens of thousands of them, which helped club funds a bit, and I've got a handful of them now. The rest are in collectors' pockets all around the world. Not only did we do an amateur radio stamp, but it was part of the official first day cover series for World Communications Year. We also, because 1983 was the year of the first launch of Shuttle Columbia STS-9, which sadly was the one that blew up eventually. But STS-9 had a radio am on board, and it was the first amateur radio operation from Earth orbit. And yet again, we managed to squeeze a first day cover out of the Solomon Islands Philatelic Bureau, which was good fun. Oscar 10, that was the year of the launch of Oscar 10. So it was a really busy time in ham radio and satellites and work. So it was quite a year. And for those naysayers, sorry about that. Moving on. 1985, time passes. It was Live Aid. Now, no TV. No satellite TV service back then either. But of course, quite a few of us had got old TVs and brand shiny new Sony Betamax video recorders. that was the latest thing. We were all getting those, picking them up in Hong Kong as we went through or what have you. But there was TV in the sky. It was being distributed around the world on Intelsat C-band. Australia also had an outback domestic TV service because there was a good TV service in Australia, but it didn't reach the outback communities. And for equality, they did a satellite delivered service. And we just happened to be in the footprint of that. So this seems unbelievable now. A cunning plan. We built our own 8-meter diameter dish with chicken wire. It worked, and his kids were certainly happy.
Tonight, the alleged hijack mastermind goes free. AIDS girl.
Right, there we go. So that was Australian TV off the satellite. The theme tune for the news may have seemed familiar to you. Yes, 1985, that was the theme tune for ABC TV News in Australia. Subsequently, a few years later, it was nicked by Channel 4, as you may recognise, in this country. And a lot of people say, oh, they, Channel 4, the Australians copied it. No, it was the other way around, actually. We copied it. So we had a satellite dish. And a homemade cable TV network grew up using old coax from various sources to serve other homes near to my mate's house. But unfortunately, I couldn't get it, apart from going round to drink beer with him and watch the telly. We had a lot of parties round there, because I lived on the other side of town. Then another cunning plan. We needed a TV transmitter. So I took my old microwave modules transverter, that black box that was shown on the shelf earlier, and after a lot of messing around, we had broadcast TV. And we got it going just in time because this little island in the middle of the Pacific, well, not really, but this little island, watched Live Aid live, which was quite shocking, really. Right, so after that, I come back, unfortunately. End of 85, we left and returned to the UK, and Anne and our kids went back to Cheadle-Hulme. The beacon transmitter and the TV transmitter stayed and ran for many years after I left. Finally died. Unfortunately, various things, and I split up with my wife, and still got on well, still see the kids, they're still up in Manchester, well, Cheadle-Hulme and Macclesfield anyway. And I started on a new job in BT in London. And pretty soon I was back in the Solomon Islands, negotiating various contracts and travelling around all over the place. Lovely job, really enjoyed it. Lots of travel, lots of fun, but not a lot of time for radio. I did some, and I had a flat in Amersham, and I was active there on 6 meters as we're coming up to another solar cycle peak. It was also, that building behind you there was where I met my current partner, Jackie. Oh look, cycle 21 has ended, but now I'm off to the States again. Oh, it's cycle 22. So, early 1990s, spending more and more time in the States, travelling again, Atlanta, Washington, all over the flipping place. But in 1992, we moved permanently to Silicon Valley. Well, permanently for a while. Set up home in Cupertino, next door to Apple, and just in time for me to catch a bit of DX. And also, coincidentally, just down the road from Stanford University, where I did visit and where I had quite a few friends. Still didn't get to play EM either. Anyway, in 93, we finally got married in Teignmouth, in Devon. Honeymooned on Burr Island and then went back to California. I'm cutting things short. 1996, back in Amersham, and I'm trying to extract myself from the telecoms industry because it's become very political. So, big move to Cornwall and something completely different. A holiday cottage business and an increase in playing radio. This is part of the holiday cottage business. Oh, we had goats as well. And bluebells. Very nice it was too. Oh, and look. 1997, we moved to Cornwall. Oh, Cycle 23 is coming up. Oh, that might be fun. Time for a little 6 meters. So, this is where my 6 meter activity started here. Some of you will have heard me say this before, but I caught the 6 meter bug in the Solomon Islands. And it's like a tropical disease. You can do something about the symptoms, but you can never really get rid of it. It bites again. So here we are, going up to my hilltop. It was a bit muddy, but there it is, pretty much a portable setup. That's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a 7 element. Yeah. So I started off with a mobile whip, then a 3 element, then a 5 element, and that picture is a 7 element. So a few boring bits. Not quite out of telecoms though, because having left BT, I got a job as a consultant based at Goonhilly, but working all around Africa, installing a VSAT, which is a very small aperture earth terminal, little dishes in other words, a bit like the lottery network. I don't know whether you've noticed back in the day there used to be lots of satellite dishes outside every little corner shop and every little post office that sold lottery tickets. They had a little VSAT terminal to link back to the computers and what have you. Anyway, I got myself on a paid safari. Zimbabwe, Zambia, all over the place. But I did get a bit of time to play radio, certainly from Gibraltar. What you're looking at there, and it's a very poor picture, I'm afraid. The thing on the right is the things that I was doing as a job, installing the satellite dishes to connect to bank data network. And if you look just to the left of that in the sky, there's a slightly V-shaped thing. That's my dipole hung together with string from the building. And with that dipole,
Charlie, Charlie. Charlie, outside, Canada. Charlie, Charlie.
Sorry about that. Then I went to Botswana as well, which was in Zimbabwe. Now in that picture is a picture of Harare, the capital of Botswana.
And the locator, Italy Mike 13. I am 13, and the name is Cedric. Charlie, Echo, Delta, Romeo, Italy, Charlie, Cedric. And I think I contacted you.
And that's the magical ICOM 706 that I used to drag everywhere with me.
And the locator, Italy Mike 13. I am.
Whilst in Zimbabwe, whilst in Botswana, in Harare, I met this wonderful guy in Zimbabwe, Z22JE. I keep saying Botswana, it's Zimbabwe. I went to Botswana, but this is Zimbabwe. I do apologise. Z22JE. Again, those who know this stuff, you'll see his shack there, which was actually a bunker, is full of Collins radio equipment from the States, which is very, very, very much a collectible. And he had just about everything they'd ever made. And it was absolutely wonderful stuff, all valves back in those days, but really lovely. Anyway, moving on. Oh, H44PT again. Yep, my 50th birthday present, if you like. It was a bit early. Was Jackie let me go back to the Solomon Islands for a reunion in 2000. The picture on the right there is a 5 element 6 meter Yagi, and the V-shaped thing is a 10 meter delta loop, inverted delta loop for talk back and chatting and what have you. So that's a view from Honiara again. There's my shack. 706 again, but underneath it an ICOM 756 Pro, which I was very pleased. Back when I lived in the Solomons, I used to sell Icon gear as a sort of, well, not the day job. Unofficially, I used to sell a lot of Icon gear, mainly to yachties, but also amateur radio. And when I knew I was going back to the Solomons, I contacted Icon in Japan and asked them would they ship me the then brand new 756 Pro direct to the Solomon Islands. And they said yes. And I bought it direct from the factory, and it cost me just about 25% of the UK cost was the FOB price from Japan to me, and I then had to bring it back into the UK. And I thought, as I was travelling on business a lot, I thought I'd best declare this. And I did declare it at Heathrow. And the customs guy said, do you make a habit of this? So I said, have you seen the price? Because it was still quite expensive. No, I definitely don't. This is just a once in a lifetime opportunity. He said, right, okay. Fred, because he had a man with him, Fred, isn't it time for your coffee break? And Fred said, yeah, I suppose so, and walked away. I was then left with one customs officer, and he said, put it back in your case and bugger off. Thank you very much, Mr. Customs Man. But there were no witnesses because his mate had gone. So they are nice. I had a great time in this reunion, bearing in mind I left in 1986. I'd been back there in sort of 89, 90, but I hadn't been back there after that. And a lot of the friends, I worked in training initially when I went there, and a lot of the people that I recruited and trained had moved up to fairly senior positions in the telecom and what have you, including one of them was chief engineer. But this is just a crowd of guys from the radio workshops before we got too drunk, basically. So, quick trip to the Solomons, 23 countries. K6NYC, who was on holiday in Hawaii this time, I won't bother playing it. Indonesia, lots of new countries. 4W6 was a nice one because that was East Timor, West Timor, I think, which was a new country back then. East Timor, Timor-Leste, yes. PY5CC again. Now this is an interesting one. From the Solomon Islands, PY is just across the Pacific Ocean, and across South America, if you work that direction. But I actually worked in Long Path, as we'll see in a minute. And I also worked Argentina, LU, which I do want to play this one.
Yes, Roger 3.
Get louder. Right, there you go. LU2FFD, Long Path. I was beaming late at night, beaming up towards Japan because that's where all the stations were at that time of night. And my signal went all the way past Japan, over Asia, over Western Europe. Didn't hear anything from there, but I did hear LU, PY, CX, Long Path, 26,000 kilometers. And I don't think I'll ever be doing that again. But there we go. Then I had to come back, and that was leaving the Solomon Islands. There was a tropical cyclone coming in. That's not a lake, that's the runway. It was a bit wet. So, yeah, we're getting close. Nearly finished now, if you're not asleep. Me and the naughties. I was up to 95 countries, as I said before. I'd grown to an 8 element. And in 2001, I finally got my DXCC on 6 meters. Mainly portable still. Oh, look, there's the 756 Pro. It did make it into the UK. Soon a bit more power from a Linear Amp UK power amp, sat in the back of the Frontiera and a generator outside. Now, third attempt at the moon. First attempt listening in the 60s. Second attempt going visiting in the 90s. Let's see what we can do now. Well, 2005, conditions were lousy. We're in the doldrums now. So finding new countries is pretty hard. But Lance W7GJ persuaded me to have a go at 6 meters EME with a newfangled digital mode. That it was new then as well. And with a single 8 element and about 250 watt, I had my first ever, finally, EME QSO on 50 megs. It was, that was great. I'd worked somebody off the moon and I was dead chuffed. But I was only ever going to work the really big stations. That picture, that QSL card there, is actually a 2 meter array, but Lance has got an equally big 6 meter array. So, okay, things can only get better. A phrase from the day, wasn't it? Well, yeah. How did I get to that point? Well, hooked on 6 meters in 78, as I say, it's a tropical disease. 50 megs back home, then in the States, but by 2005, it's all dying down a bit again. So I work Lance, I have a first and easy EME QSO, but also work K6NYC, there's that name again, Mike Stahl, and another guy I know, Dennis, K7BV. But really, it's like, so what? 2008, when I added another couple of Americans, but, nothing new there. But then, that's how I felt. What next? Okay, April 2009, E51 SIX for a new DXCC. E51 is the South Cook Islands in the Pacific. That's one I'm not going to work direct, so okay, EME is good, isn't it? There's a QSL card to prove it. So this is just a boring bit. That is my antenna system as was back then. That's for 8 elements. There, we'll come to that in a minute, but I'll just let this run for it's nice to work stuff on 6 meters EME. That's everything from Antarctica to Alaska and what have you, and everything in between. So, okay, G8BCG, getting bored and getting collared again. That's an interesting picture. That was on the ferry. There were loads of those on the ferry to Jersey. It was like a time warp. It was the celebrations of World War II. Well, you'll come to it in a minute. As you can see, quite amazing. It was a very rare country, Jersey, on 50 megs, particularly in the States. So it was Lance again that persuaded me to take the moonbound skier with me. So with me truck and a 7-element Yagi, I headed off to Jersey, borrowed the Jersey Amateur Radio Society shack, and there's the amplifier and the trusty 756 Pro again. And that is the Jersey Amateur Radio Society shack. It's a German World War II bunker right on the coast, near to the airport, as you can see by the radar golf ball there. And that's my aerial temporarily up on the roof there with all their verticals and all sorts of stuff. It was good fun. I had nearly 500 QSOs and 7 people off the moon, including Lance, so they were quite happy. That's the aerial, all tied together with string. And the thing in front of it is the leaned up against the wall is the 4-element HF beam that I had to take down to borrow the tower for my aerial. And then after a few days, drive home knackered. Yeah, there it is. Ah, that was it, yeah. GJ60LIB for the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Jersey. So we had a special QSO with Mike Stahl, who was a war veteran as well, so that was quite good. Okay, so moving on again. End of 2005, we got a place in Lanzarote, having sold our holiday cottage business. And so, yeah, back on 6 meters again from EA8. That's a 7-element Yagi in EA8. And another magic spot. The thing that you learn with 6 meters is the closer you can get, or the less south you are, nearer the equator, or the less north you are in the more north you are in the southern hemisphere, the better it works. But again, I was there. That's me working EME in the night. That little dot in front of the Yagi is the moon. A very short summary of a good few years and many, many holidays. Best QSO direct without the moon was to New Zealand, ZL1RS, which is quite a long way, 19,000 kilometers. And funnily enough, he was also my best DX off the moon. So, more power. Get home. And these things don't exist, by the way. If you ask the RSGB or if you ask Ofcom, they'll say these things don't exist and never have existed. I made a proposal to Ofcom for a high power research permit, aka a notice of variation. It was for VHF weak signal propagation, both terrestrial and EME, and I kept it deliberately wide and non-specific. I had to do all the calculations that we all have to do now, but I had to do them properly back then without any advice on how to do it. But I figured it out, and Ofcom seemed to accept them. So amazingly, I applied for 32 dBW as opposed to the 26 dBW, i.e. instead of 400 watts, I applied for 1600 watts. And I did it with a 20 dB antenna, which is the thing you're looking at there, which gives me on 6 meters an ERP of 158 kilowatts. And amazingly, though I wasn't active on 2 meters at the time, I thought, we'll give it a go. So I did the same calculations for 2 meters and I put in the application and didn't hold my breath. They were both granted. Ofcom gave me that. And I've got it, and it's framed. It does say they can withdraw it at any time if I'm a naughty boy, but I've got it. So there we go. So if anybody says you're running too much power, no, I'm not quite running enough power actually, but there you go. So moving on to 50 megs again, obviously with a big aerial and that power, it makes a difference. So I got to a lot of hours as well. Got to 200 DXCC in early 2011. But by then there's a steady move towards digimodes. So yeah, I started on JT6M, didn't do much, but it was good. But of course it changes. Okay, 2010 G0KSC, I tested. This is where the 8-element LFAs started being used. We've sort of skipped back a bit here because I wanted to get all the previous stuff in about DX. And the picture you see there, I did a direct comparison on 2 towers of an M² antenna and one of Justin's LFAs, and the LFA came out pretty impressive. So I've used this stuff ever since. The big array that you've seen the picture of before, I built 4 7-elements. Stand by for laughter. That worked great, and I worked lots of stuff on that. I was up to 230 DXCCs, and things were dying down rapidly, so I was thinking, what do we do next? Challenges along the way. Yeah, we had a bit of a storm, and we had a bit of a problem. Oh dear. It came down in a big way. So I recognised I'd put it back together, but you know, they were coming to the end of the life and too much string. So I built another one, but using a different design this time from Justin, called an OpDes, an opposing phase driven element system aerial, which is the same kind of thing, but it's slightly better and slightly more gain. So I built 4 of those. Justin does the designs and very kindly helps me with the bits, but I did the building because I couldn't afford his prices. But he has to make a living, and you know, he charges what he needs to make a living. Challenges along the way. Oh no, it happened again. The sheep were not impressed. But you know, that's life. That was a mess. The tower actually capsized. It was a four-wheel 30-meter trailer tower. The tower was virtually down at the time, or partially down, but a big guy anchor snapped. It was actually a U-bolt that shattered, and the whole thing blew over and actually blew into my smaller tower. And I think it was that saved it, because it slid down the side of that tower and then landed on the chassis, which of course has suspension, and the thing bounced a bit, I think. So although the head unit is well bent, as you can see, the rest of the tower was absolutely fine, and we just cut that off where it's bent, got it re-welded, and lo and behold, and got a got a whacking great telehander to just stand the trailer up again. That's what happened to the aerials. That's actually the small tower you're looking at there. And as the big tower fell over into the small tower caught the four big aerials and they stayed up there. And the tower came down to the ground, but the H-frame and the aerials stayed up there. And the most difficult bit was actually salvaging that, getting it down without getting injured in the process. My view on life. But pretty soon we were back up and running again. Right, I'm going to skip a bit now. So 144 megs EME. I decided I'd have a go at 144 because there were people going to interesting places. So again, I built some LFAs rather. Decided to have a go and see if I could use my permit, which I did. The only funny bit here, I'm not going to bother about the rest, but hopefully, if I make this work, when I first built them, I had a bit of a problem. That's a gentle breeze. They woggled. I think it may be time to fit the damping guys. And so, with a few bits of string, same wind conditions, some random lengths of guying, deliberately random so that there's no resonance, absolutely dead stable, antennas fixed, unfortunately weather conditions broken. So there you go. Right, I also, just before COVID, suddenly decided I was interested in HF with digimodes, so I decided to have a play, particularly with FT8 coming along, which really was a game changer. And of course, everybody's saying, well, not everybody, but a lot of people are saying, FT8 and these digimodes, it's not proper radio, it needs a computer. Yeah, well, there you go. As far as I'm concerned, anyhow, it's constant improvement and having fun. So I started playing below 50 megs and did a bit of SSB and CW, but mainly FT8 and FT4, and just proving how good it is, because I don't have big aerials on the HF bands. I have wires, dipoles, and I've actually got a hex beam as well, but not up on the hill, down at home, and only about 15 feet off the ground. But in the period of COVID, 10-band DXCC, so doable. Back to satellites, moving on very quickly. Really new. Again, I played satellites back in the Solomon Islands, but not since. But suddenly I got the bug in 2019. I actually worked on EME, Alpha 21 Botswana, A21 EME on 6 meters and 2 meters. And they announced that they were going to be on QO100. So I thought, might give this a go. So I had the bits. I had a 13 SEMS transverter. I had a Wi-Fi, long-range Wi-Fi PA that I'd used to connect Wi-Fi to my shack up on the top of the hill. And I had an old Sky dish in the barn and a few other bits and pieces. So again, Sunday afternoon, put it all together and amazingly managed to work A21 EME. I've been a life member of AMSAT since since whenever, 1981 it says there, yeah, which was when I was in the Solomons. But I haven't really done that much with satellites. So really getting back and using QO100 was really fantastic. Great feeling. And of course it's backyard stuff, guys, so no excuses. That's that's a little dish. That's all you need. As Stockport Radio Society is now proving, of course. At least I hope you are. I hope it's still working. You can even try before you buy, of course, by listening to the Goonhilly Web SDR and hearing all the DX that's on there. If that doesn't help you, I don't know what will. So here we go again. A21 EME works, so I was playing. What's really interesting, that's the official footprint of the satellite. The satellite's above the equator, of course, in the middle of Africa. And so you can just about reach to Brazil and possibly a little bit further that way, and out to Indonesia and up to the poles. Not to North America mainland, or at least not in theory. Everybody's trying to stretch that, though. People are going to the edge of the footprint. The first real attempts were made by a group at the Technical University in Bandung in Indonesia, and they managed to work through the satellite with the satellite below the horizon. The calculation showed the satellite was about 1 to 1.5 degrees below the horizon, and they had terrible fading and horrible stuff, but they did manage to give lots of people a new country out there. Likewise, sometime later, a guy went to Christmas Island, VK9, which is off the west coast of Australia, giving people a great pleasure to work that. Another mate of mine, Bo, OX3LX, who works for the telecoms industry in Greenland, he was on 6 meters, but he didn't play satellites. But I said, any chance you can give it a go? And he said, well, I haven't got any kit, but if you can get me some kit. So I managed to arrange the loan of some kit from a group in Holland who built a satellite system specifically to loan out to people to take into rare corners of the world. And we got it to Greenland. And
This is the right QT8, so I will optimize and be back tomorrow. Roger 5-9, Peter, in Hotel Papa 15. Thank you so much, Bo. You're 59 in Italy, Oscar 70. Do you wish me to publicise this, or do you want to wait till tomorrow break? Sorry, the question again, Peter? The question is, do you wish me to announce this QSO, or do you wish to wait until tomorrow? We probably have an audience anyway, over. Yeah, I have to wait for tomorrow. I go to dinner now. I just drive out to this QT8 to check if it's okay, and it seems to work fine, and so I have to optimize.
Right, so that was the first ever North American continent QSO on QO100, which was just a test, and he came back on the next day and worked, and for a few days afterwards, and worked a lot of other people. But it also meant that those who were interested could claim a Worked All Continents award via the satellite, because that was the only opportunity to get anywhere in the North American continent. Although there are plans to try Newfoundland, which is there's a little spot in Newfoundland which is about 2 or 3 degrees, I think, below the horizon to the satellite. But it may work, and there are people daft enough to try it, so hopefully this year. Satellite DXCC, I know it's only a repeater, but Satellite DXCC in 2020 with TT8SN being number 100. This is fun. I just love it. QO100 portable, low power, small antenna, lightweight. You can do it anywhere, basically. And of course, members of the public might have heard of amateur radio, but they sure as hell haven't heard of amateur satellites. And the usual response, as you can imagine, is amateur satellites? What? Really? Nah. But yeah, there we go. This this is me in December 21 on the Lizard. That was actually about 2 weeks before my heart attack, actually. But there you go. Maybe carrying the rocks to hold down the dish were what did it. But there we go. I went back again in April 22 for International Marconi Day, and also in September 22 for a National Trust Heritage Day, which was really interesting. Actually, we had a lot of people at that, and a lot of publicity from the National Trust, both before and after the event. The thing on the right is highlighted about me talking to the Neumayer German scientific station in Antarctica, which was great fun and got a lot of people listening. But the best bit, I think, is in the middle, which basically they were letting kids play sending Morse and what have you, and handing out free cake as well. And a young girl read the Morse thing and then wrote in the visitor's book in Morse, "nice cake," which got everybody laughing, because I don't think they spotted it at the time. It was only afterwards. Okay, QO100, boring stuff. But did you see that? Yes, I did work FT8WW a month ago on the satellite. And there's just so much activity. It's amazing. So this is all there for you lot. So that's really about it, I think. Okay, so now and later. Still new ones to be worked on QO100. Most recently, a couple of weeks ago, I worked ZD9VZV and demonstrating just how easy it is to play on the satellite. He was actually on a Southern Ocean cruise ship that was spending time in various places, and you did get a few hours ashore if you wanted to jump into a rib and go ashore from the cruise boat. So he went ashore on Tristan da Cunha, which is rare as hell, ZD9, and sat in a little pop-up cafe that the boat had set up there, and played on QO100 for about 4 hours until his battery died. And I was one of the very lucky ones. I think he worked about 100 people, and they're probably going to be the only 100 people that ever worked Tristan da Cunha on the satellite, unless somebody else tries it again. So whether this will work, I think it will. Now, I think I have to press play.
Hopefully, you're about to hear ZD9VZV on Tristan da Cunha, which is a new country for me and very rare on any band. This is on the QO100 satellite,
Yeah,
which makes it
right.
even rarer. The frequencies shown are, of course, on the radio.
Quite a decent signal from his little briefcase. Right, anyway, of course, that's satellite, but EME's still there and getting better. We're more and more developments being done with software. And again, a couple of weeks ago, I did a test with Lance on a new bit of software from Joe Taylor, which is a de-expedition mode for his Q65 VME software, and managed to have quite a reasonable exchange, no problem at all, working Lance off the moon on 50 megs when conditions were poor, and his signal was neg 30. In fact, one of them somewhere there, if I can find it, was neg 32. Yeah, it's 73 to me. The left-hand red, the WSJT screen, the second line of the red on the right, on the left rather, his signal strength was neg 32. I couldn't hear it, I couldn't see it on the screen, but I could decode it, which was quite amazing. Anyway, where do we go from here? Solar Cycle 25. Before this chat, we were talking about things getting better and better and better, and certainly depending on who you believe, I want to believe the red line on that map that says we're heading for one of the best cycles ever. But I suspect it's going to be more like the purpley line. But whatever, it's going to be good. It's going to be very good on all the HF bands. F2 is going to be fantastic. Now is the time to be playing radio, whether it's HF, VHF, whatever. Of course, the satellites aren't affected. Well, they might be negatively affected, but QO100 will always be there, and you can always play with that until it fails because it's a repeater. The moon will always be there, and in fact, moon bounce is not quite so good when obviously the sunspot cycle's improving and the sunspot numbers are high, and really you can't squirt a signal through the ionosphere because the ionosphere is reflecting it all back. But you know, it really is the time to get on 6 meters. I'm plugging 6, despite the fact this talk is about moon bounce and satellites. It's about amateur radio really, and my passion for all the various bits of it. And just in case you think that SSB's all gone away, like AM went away back in the day, in actual fact, all the records probably are going to be broken initially on digital modes, but there's still an amazing amount of SSB about, and it's ever increasing on 6 meters because the propagation's becoming good and because it's possible. So here's one from again in March. Mali. Oops. He pressed the wrong button. Right.
Delta Oscar 1, Tango Lima Romeo, hoffe richtig. Rapport 559, Roger.
I don't know whether you can see the Apple. You'll see the
Hotel, vielen Dank, 73
into the red, 20 over 9 on SSB from Mali.
This is TZ1CE, by the way. Or what?
Stop that. So that was only a few weeks ago. It's going to get better than that, much better than that. So if you've got any kind of bit of wire, that, by the way, is not on my big array, which is down on the ground for safety at the moment. It was on an 8-element Yagi, which is also down on the ground at the moment because it blew. The rotator broke at the weekend, but it will be back in action sometime over Easter. I've got the bits to fix it. So, okay, full circle. This is the last one, so if anybody's asleep, please wake them up. Back in 1966, you remember that QSL card to G8BCG in Hannaford, Lou? Well, there it is. There's the QSL card. Next week, we're buying a house in Hannaford. That's the view from the front door. If you look at the view, it's actually just 50 meters away from this bloke that I sent a QSL card to in 1966. Not planned, and in fact I only discovered it. I discovered that QSL card a few months ago, but it suddenly dawned on me because we've been looking for a new house, downsizing from this bloody great farm that we got with land and things that keep me tired all the time, but still keeping the antenna farm, by the way, no worries there. I'm keeping that bit of the field. So there we go, Adventures in Amateur Radio. Thanks for putting up with my ramblings. It's I'm open to questions, and basically all I'm trying to say here is I hope that all of you enjoy this great hobby as much as I do, and still do after around 60 years playing. There's always something new to explore. 73 from me, and that's really it. And I can nip back to any questions. I'm just going to stop the thing now, if I can. Oh, and of course there's that, which I love. But I'll switch that off now. Oh.
The question from Chris was, have you ever done asteroid bounce, and is it possible?
It's certainly possible. I've done lots of meteor scatter back in the day on 2 meters and on 6 meters, which are little asteroids, I suppose. But in theory, I suppose if you know where it is, there was one came through. Can't think of the name of it now, but there was one came through between us and the moon a few weeks ago, wasn't there? And I suppose in theory, you could bounce signals off that. Well, you definitely could, because of course they were tracking it with radar. The other end of that scale is, I think it was a group in Germany a few years ago, actually did Mars bounce, not with anything significant like a QSO or anything, but they did send microwave signals to Mars, bounce them off Mars and detect them, see them coming back on a waterfall, you know, on a very sensitive receiver. So Mars bounce, or when Elon Musk sets up his base station on Mars, we'll be able to hear it.
Do you do SPR2 on Whisper? Do you do that on 6 meters as well?
Sorry, I missed the question.
Sorry, do you do Whisper on 2 meters as well? 6 meters as well?
Yeah, you do Whisper on 6 meters. There are some Whisper beacons. In actual fact, because of the different modes, a lot of beacons are on FT8 now, but there's also other modes, a thing called PI4, which is a very good mode for beacons. But certainly a lot of people do play on Whisper on 6 meters. I have to say, FT8 seems to have killed a lot of things. I'm not saying it's killing amateur radio, but because it's so easy and it works so well, a lot of people are using it when it really isn't the right mode. FT8 is completely useless, for example, for meteor scatter and things like that. And a much better mode out of the same software package is MSK144, which works brilliantly on 2 meters. It works brilliantly on 6 meters with short meteor bursts. But people seem to stick with FT8. I mean, going the other way, when there's a rare station on and he's trying to work as many people as possible, it would make a lot more sense to use FT4 because it takes half the time. But people just don't. They just stick with FT8 because it works. It works so well that, you know. I know that doesn't answer your question, but
no, it does. To be honest, it does. I mean, next month, it is next month, isn't it, Evan? I'm supposed to be doing a talk on FT8 and FT4, and I'm going to include the Whisper for propagation. Yeah, because my background is as a physicist, so I'm going to do a presentation on that. So it does answer the question. I mean, I've done a bit of Whisper as well, and it's fun to do. But I am interested in 6 genuinely.
Right. Well, that's where I promise to work you. I can work. I fairly regularly work Mike G8BCG, who is again a mate of mine from way back, and he's in where is he? He's in he's not in. He's somewhere over there anyway. So yeah, I'd hope to work you on 6 meters.
Yeah, I hope so. As I say, I'm going to stick an area up for 6. At the moment, by the way, with your fantastic setup that you've got at home, all of my I've only got one HF aerial, and it's in the loft itself. So
yeah,
just saying.
But you know, when conditions are right, it just works. You know, yes. I'm very fortunate to have the space to put up a big aerial, but I also quite often in the summer, in the sporadic E season, just leave. I've got a halo type, well, it's called a big wheel, but a halo type thing for 6 meters, and it's not particularly high, and it just sits on a pole in the field. The great advantage with that, of course, is it's omnidirectional, so you hear stuff from all directions, and in the sporadic E season, it's a heck of a lot better than trying to twizz a very sharp beam. You know, I mean, my EME array weighs a lot, has got a lot of turning motion on it, moment on it rather, and therefore I can't turn it very quickly. So if I'm beaming to the southwest, and there's somebody in the east or whatnot calling me or wants to work me, it takes a long time to get the beam around there, you know. So big antennas are great for pinpoint, but for general working, they're a real pain.
I'm looking forward to the summer. I've only been doing HF for 4 months now.
Well,
So.
it's going to be good, we hope. No, it is, certainly.
Well, you mentioned Cycle 25. I mean, based on some of your previous slides, you seem to tend to go places when the cycle reaches the top. Have you got any plans to do anything similar for this one? Or have you reached the end, should we say, as far as travelling is concerned?
I don't know. I'll be 72 in July. I would dearly love to do something. There are lots of opportunities. Quite a few people are trying to convince me that I should go back to the Solomon Islands because there's quite often HF operation there, the expeditions and what have you, and it is now 2 countries as well. It's H44, which is the main island group of Solomon Islands, and Tuamotu province, which is way out to the east, about 1,000 miles east, which is H40. And I could do that, but it's expensive, B, it's a bloody long way, and C, it's not quite as nice as it used to be. I don't think, from talking to friends there. Certainly Tuamotu is if I could get out there, but I don't know. Watch this space. At the moment, I don't have any plans, but then I didn't have any plans to go back in 2000 until a group of Japanese radio hams who were visiting the UK and were at the VHF convention, which was at Sandown Park back in those days. And we all went out for a meal, the 6-meter DXs, and had a few drinks. And these Japanese guys suggested that I could go to the Solomon Islands again. And I'm pretty sure that I said, I'll think about it. About 3 months later, somebody sent me a copy of the JARL, the Japanese Amateur Radio League magazine, with an approximate translation, which was Peter H44PT announces that he will be going back to the Solomon Islands. So I'm a bit wary about that these days.
Okay, fair enough. Well,
I've got a question for you lot, though. How are you getting on with your satellite setup?
Right. Basically, our walk-through house here, where we have to set it up, is in the car park, right near the gate, because of the height. So we could just get it over there with no problem. What we're doing is putting it on the fire escape at the side of the building. Just see what is in the way there. I think there's a tree and a telegraph pole there, but we may miss it. And then set the kit up there, and then just run an RF cable down to the radio in the G8B room here.
Brilliant. That would be good.
But we are, yeah.
Sorry.
We are open to. We are going to take it out on events with us, and we've got some plans actually coming up, and hopefully we'll take it out. We did actually take kit out up to Manchester Airport to an event up there.
Yeah.
And the questions that we got asked up there about, it's a case of, are you watching Coronation Street?
Yeah.
The usual thing. But it did actually create a lot of interest. It does. So we're hoping that when we take it out on the events, it is going to create a lot of interest and possibly get more people involved with it.
Yeah. I found that it was amazing. The National Trust things that I did were just, it was really easier to engage people. With the HF Shack, a lot of people wandered in and looked and were interested, but they kind of almost didn't know what questions to ask. Whereas with the satellite, it was something, everybody's seen the walk on the wall for Sky TV and what have you, and it's like, what's that? And you got more sensible questions, and it was really it was great fun, and it's easy to do as well, which is
it is. But it does. It brings in the questions, but it also brings in the fun elements of it as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this the other thing is there is always activity. You know, I mean, HF is great, but it does tend to follow the rules of Murphy or Sod's Law or whatever. Whenever you've got a crowd there, there's nobody on the radio, and whenever you've got no crowd, there's something really interesting going on.
There is.
Yeah, it's I've been using mine with an Icon 705, which is brilliant. I do like working full duplex though, so what I've actually got is a separate receive converter, and I tend to use it at home. I tend to use it either with my old FT847 or with an Icon 9700, or just a dongle into the computer so I can receive. I like to, well, I could say I like the sound of my own voice, but I like to hear what's going on in the background, and I like to make sure that my signal sounds all right and I'm on the right frequency, because so many people on the satellites end up, for whatever reason, calling in the wrong place or at the wrong time. Or I like to have one earphone on so that I can hear a bit of talkback. If I put the headset on, I can't speak because of the delay. I get all sort of tangled. A bit like this.
Yeah, we've as I say, we're still learning. We're still playing about with it. We're still learning, but we're getting there. We're making contact. That's the main thing.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you noticed, by the way. I don't know whether you can see it on the screen, but I've got my data shirt on.
Yes.
It's a waterfall.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Peter, that's been an excellent evening, and I've kept everybody entertained around here, and as I'm sure we have online as well. The only thing that's missing is I keep expecting a bloke to turn up behind you with a big red book saying, "Peter Taylor, this is your life." So, because I think we've had that tonight, haven't we? So, from everybody here.
Well, I hope there's another episode or two.
I'm sure there is. And maybe we could all come down and see you when you've moved into new house, and perhaps we could all be around the stage rather than sat up here in Stockport.
It's quite a small house. We are downsizing, so
Well, we have a marquee and a tent, don't we? So I hope there's plenty of room. Plenty of room in your garden.
Yeah, if anybody's ever down here, though, always happy to take visitors. We've got some people coming from the States in the middle of the year, and not staying with us, but we'll be visiting. So we'll be drinking our way around, I think. Rob,
thanks very much, Peter. I'll let you go and have your beer now, and I think we will as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete.
Peter, from everybody.
Take care, 7-3. See you on the radio.